Have you ever stood somewhere and felt like the ground beneath your feet was trying to tell you something? Like the land itself had a story so old, so layered, and so extraordinary that no textbook could ever do it justice. That is exactly what Appalachia does to people. This ancient, mist-covered, deeply alive region stretching across the eastern spine of North America is one of the most naturally beautiful places on the face of this earth, and most people drive past it without ever truly seeing it. The hollows, the ridges, the rivers older than the ocean, the communities that carved dignity out of hard rock and harder circumstances. All of it deserves to be understood. And honestly, the people who call this region home deserve far better than they have historically been given, starting with wages that actually reflect the value of human labor and the real cost of a real life. Today, you are going to discover 20 facts about Appalachia that will make you look at this region completely differently. Let's get into it. Fact 20. The mountain chain that makes the Rockies look like a teenager. Before we get into the hidden waterfalls and the secret gorges and the trails that will change your life, we need to start with the single most important fact about Appalachia because everything else flows from it. These mountains are ancient beyond any reasonable human comprehension. Current geological evidence places the initial formation of the Appalachian chain at somewhere between 480 and 500 million years ago, a number so large it is almost meaningless until you compare it to something else. The Rocky Mountains, which most Americans think of as the grand old peaks of the continent, are roughly 80 million years old. The Himalayas are younger still. The Appalachians were already worn, rounded, and deeply weathered before any of those ranges even began forming. They existed before fish had legs, before flowers existed, before the Atlantic Ocean opened up and separated the continents. When you stand on an Appalachian ridge and look out over those rolling, misty layers of blue and green, you are standing on some of the oldest exposed rock on this planet. That changes the feeling of a place. You can sense it even if you cannot name it. Fact 19. The hiking capital of the Eastern world. If you are a hiker, or if you have ever been remotely curious about becoming one, there is no more important piece of geography in the eastern United States than the Appalachian mountain system. The sheer volume and variety of trails concentrated within this region is genuinely staggering. The Appalachian Trail alone stretches 2,198 miles across 14 states from Georgia to Maine, making it the longest hiking-only footpath on Earth. But that is just the beginning. The region also contains the backbone of the Mountains to Sea Trail in North Carolina, the long trails of Shenandoah National Park, the remote backcountry of the Great Smoky Mountains, the rugged paths of the new River Gorge, and thousands of additional miles of maintained trail in national forests, state parks, and wilderness areas across the entire chain. The terrain ranges from gentle riverside walks to technical ridge scrambles with 1,000-foot drops on either side. The scenery ranges from ancient hemlock gorges so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat to high open balds with 360-degree views that make you feel like you are standing on top of the world. If you spent every weekend of your life hiking in the Appalachians and never repeated a trail, you would still not finish. That is not an exaggeration. That is simply the scale of what is here. Fact 18. The valley that channels the entire continent. Running for over 1,200 miles from Canada all the way down into Alabama, the Great Appalachian Valley is one of the most geographically significant landforms in North America, and one of the least famous. This massive natural corridor sits between the Blue Ridge Mountains to the east and the Appalachian Plateau to the west, and it has been directing the movement of animals, people, and eventually entire civilizations for thousands of years. Indigenous nations used it as their primary travel route long before any European arrived. The Cherokee called portions of it the Great Trading Path. Later, Scots, Irish, and German settlers poured through it by the hundreds of thousands, following its natural grade southwestward from Pennsylvania into the Carolina and Georgia backcountry. populating the Appalachian highlands in the process. The valley's floor is composed of rich limestone soil that produces some of the most fertile farmland in the eastern United States, and the patchwork of farms, orchards, and small towns that occupies it today is one of the most genuinely beautiful rural landscapes in America. In autumn especially, driving the length of this valley with the Blue Ridge rising to one side and the plateau to the other is an experience that belongs on every traveler's list. Fact 17. The river system that supplies millions of people who have never seen it. The watersheds originating in the Appalachian highlands quietly supply drinking water to tens of millions of Americans living in cities from Atlanta to Baltimore who have never once thought about where their water actually comes from. The forest acts as an enormous natural filtration and storage system, absorbing rainfall, slowing its movement through the landscape, and releasing it gradually into rivers and underground aquifers in a state of relative purity. When intact forest covers a watershed, the water that emerges downstream is cleaner, more consistent in flow, and far less prone to the kind of devastating flood surges that follow deforestation. This is infrastructure. It is not dramatic infrastructure with steel and concrete and ribbon-cutting ceremonies, but it is infrastructure that performs daily functions worth tens of billions of dollars that would be extraordinarily expensive to replicate artificially. Every intact Appalachian forest is simultaneously a nature preserve, a hiking destination of extraordinary beauty, and a piece of critical public works serving communities hundreds of miles away. That combination of ecological and practical value is essentially unique on this continent. Fact 16. The Synchronized firefly event that people travel across the country to see. Every year in late May or early June, something happens in the forests of the Great Smoky Mountains that is so visually extraordinary and so scientifically unusual that it has become one of the most sought-after natural events in the entire eastern United States. A species of firefly called Photinus carolinus produces a perfectly synchronized bioluminescent display, thousands upon thousands of individual insects flashing in coordinated rhythmic waves that sweep across the dark forest floor like pulses of living electricity. The synchronization is precise enough that the pauses between flash sequences are as coordinated as the flashes themselves, creating a rhythm that moves through the forest in visible waves. This phenomenon occurs in only a handful of locations worldwide, and the Smokies population is by far the most accessible and reliably spectacular. The National Park Service now runs a lottery for viewing permits because demand is so overwhelming. People who have witnessed it describe the experience as genuinely unlike anything else they have ever seen. It happens once a year for about 2 weeks in a forest that was here 480 million years ago, and it is completely, utterly free to witness if you plan far enough ahead to secure a spot. Fact 15. The Moonbow waterfall that exists nowhere else in the Western Hemisphere. Tucked into the Daniel Boone National Forest of Kentucky, Cumberland Falls produces a phenomenon so rare that only one other place on Earth can claim it consistently. On nights when the moon is full, the massive mist cloud generated by this 68-foot waterfall interacts with the moonlight to produce a moonbow, a rainbow formed by lunar rather than solar light. While the colors appear more muted than a daytime rainbow, appearing largely as a luminous white arch against the dark river below, the effect is so ethereal and so profoundly beautiful that people have been traveling specifically to witness it for well over a century. The only other location on the planet where this happens with any reliability is Victoria Falls in Africa. Every other waterfall on Earth, Niagara included, produces this phenomenon either never or so rarely as to be effectively unreliable. The fact that this experience is available in the Kentucky mountains within a day's drive of tens of millions of Americans and is almost entirely unknown outside of the region is one of the more remarkable oversights in American travel culture. Fact 14. The ancient forest that loggers could not reach. In the mountains of western North Carolina, there is a gorge so steep, so sheer, and so rugged that when industrial logging companies swept through the Appalachian Mountains in the late 19th and early 20th century, stripping virtually every accessible slope in the region bare with a speed and thoroughness that is genuinely shocking to contemplate, they simply could not get to it. Linville Gorge drops nearly 2,000 feet from its rim to the Linville River below, and the cliff faces on either side were too vertical, too loose, and too dangerous for even the most aggressive timber operations of the era to navigate profitably. The result is one of the most extraordinary accidents of conservation in American history. The old-growth hardwood forest that carpets the gorge walls today is not a restored forest or a second-growth approximation. It is the original forest, trees that were old when the first European explorers arrived, standing today exactly where they have always stood, unbothered and untouched. Hiking the rim trail of Linville Gorge on a clear morning, with the ancient canopy below you and the river glittering at the bottom of a chasm that took millions of years to carve, is one of the most naturally beautiful hiking experiences available anywhere in the eastern United States. Full stop. Fact 13. The mountain town that became one of America's great small cities. Asheville, North Carolina sits in a bowl formed by converging mountain ridges in the southern Appalachians, and its geography has shaped its identity in ways that continue to unfold. Because the terrain made it difficult to reach well into the 20th century, Asheville developed a self-sufficient, insular cultural character that bred creativity in the specific way that isolation sometimes does. By the early 21st century, it had evolved into one of the most vibrant arts, music, and culinary destinations in the American South, with a concentration of working artists, live music venues, independent restaurants, and craft producers per capita that rivals cities many times its size. It is also, sitting at roughly 2,100 feet of elevation and ringed on all sides by mountain ridges, one of the most naturally beautiful cities in the entire United States. The air is noticeably cooler and cleaner than the Piedmont cities below. The sunsets over the western ridges are the kind that stop traffic, and the access to world-class hiking, the Blue Ridge Parkway runs directly through the area, and dozens of trail systems are within a 30-minute drive, makes it not just a beautiful place to visit, but an extraordinarily beautiful place to live. Fact 12. The gorge that is the newest national park in America. In December 2020, the new River Gorge in West Virginia was officially designated as the newest national park in the United States. And if you have not yet visited it, that designation should move it to the top of your list immediately. The gorge itself drops over 750 feet in elevation across approximately 50 miles of river corridor, creating a series of whitewater rapids that are among the most technically demanding in the eastern United States. The surrounding forest, protected from development by the sheer walls of the gorge, contains stands of mature hemlock and hardwood that represent some of the finest river bottom forest remaining in Appalachia. The rock climbing on the gorge walls is considered world-class. The hiking trails range from flat riverside paths to vertiginous ridge scrambles with views that will stop you cold. The famous New River Gorge Bridge, the longest single-arch steel bridge in the Western Hemisphere, frames the entire scene in a way that is genuinely breathtaking from both above and below. And the towns of Fayetteville and Hinton that anchor either end of the gorge are exactly the kind of small Appalachian communities that remind you why this region's slow, grounded, community-centered pace of life is something the rest of the country is slowly and painfully trying to rediscover. Fact 11. The largest temperate deciduous forest on Earth. This is the fact that most people never hear and that completely reframes the entire Appalachian mountain system the moment you understand it. The eastern deciduous forest of North America, anchored by and reaching its greatest diversity within the Appalachian mountain range, is the largest temperate deciduous forest remaining on the planet. Not one of the largest. It covers an area stretching from the Gulf Coast up through New England and west to the edge of the Great Plains, but its biological heart, its greatest concentration of tree species, its deepest ecological complexity, its most intact and ancient stands, lies within the Appalachian Highlands. The sheer number of tree species represented here exceeds that of all of Europe combined. A single cove in the Great Smoky Mountains can contain more tree species than the entire British Isles. Walking into a mature Appalachian cove forest in late spring, with the light filtering green through a canopy layered 5 or 6 stories high and the wildflowers carpeting the floor in every direction, is walking into what much of the eastern half of this continent looked like before the modern world arrived. It is breathtaking in the most literal sense of that word. Fact 10. the trail system that redefines what hiking means. Most people think of a great hiking trail as a well-marked path through attractive scenery. The Appalachian mountain system contains those trails by the thousands, but it also contains something rarer and more important: a network of designated wilderness areas, backcountry zones, and roadless regions where the experience of hiking is genuinely transformative rather than merely recreational. The Shining Rock Wilderness and Middle Prong Wilderness in North Carolina, the Otter Creek and Dolly Sods Wilderness areas in West Virginia, the Cohutta Wilderness in Georgia. These are places where you can hike for multiple days without crossing a paved road, where the silence is so complete that it becomes its own sensory experience, and where the combination of ancient geology, intact forest, clean water, and complete absence of modern noise creates a mental and emotional reset that is genuinely difficult to achieve anywhere else in the eastern United States. The research on what extended time in wilderness environments does to the human nervous system, reducing cortisol, lowering blood pressure, restoring attention, improving sleep, reads like a description of exactly what the Appalachian backcountry provides. These mountains are not just beautiful, they are healing in a measurable, documented physiological sense. Fact 9. The rhododendron bloom that covers entire mountains in pink. Every June, something happens in the high country of the southern Appalachians that is so visually dramatic it requires the kind of superlatives that normally feel like exaggeration, but in this case simply do not. The Catawba rhododendron, a shrub that grows in dense, impenetrable thickets across the high ridges and rocky balds of the North Carolina and Tennessee mountains, produces a bloom so abundant, so vividly pink-purple, and so geographically extensive that entire mountain slopes change color simultaneously. Roan Mountain, which straddles the North Carolina-Tennessee border at nearly 6,300 feet of elevation, hosts one of the largest natural rhododendron gardens in the world. Hundreds of acres of continuous bloom visible for miles across the surrounding ridges. The Roan Mountain Rhododendron Festival has been drawing visitors for decades, but honestly, no festival is necessary. Simply hiking the Appalachian Trail across Roan's high balds during peak bloom, with the rhododendrons blazing on either side of the trail and the mountain views stretching endlessly in every direction, is one of the purest and most naturally beautiful hiking experiences available anywhere on this continent. If you do one Appalachian hike in your lifetime, this is a serious candidate for it. Fact 8. The underground lake that exists beneath a Tennessee cornfield. In Sweetwater, Tennessee, beneath land that looks from the surface like an ordinary piece of rural Appalachian countryside, lies the largest underground lake in the United States. The Lost Sea is part of the Craighead Cavern System, a network of limestone chambers carved by water over millions of years, and its main lake covers more than 4 acres of perfectly still, crystal-clear water in a cavern room of extraordinary scale. The documented chambers represent only the known portion of the system. Divers have pushed into passages extending far beyond the mapped area and have yet to find the boundaries of the lake. The water maintains a constant temperature of 54 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Rainbow trout, introduced into the system decades ago, have thrived in the complete darkness, developing the slightly different behavioral patterns you would expect from fish that no longer need to be concerned with aerial predators. Glass-bottom boat tours allow visitors to see the floor of the lake and the cave formations reflected in water so clear it appears almost invisible. It is one of the most hauntingly, quietly beautiful natural spaces in the entire Appalachian region, and it exists entirely underground, beneath a state that most people associate exclusively with its surface landscapes. Fact 7. The autumn that rivals anything on Earth. Every October, the Appalachian Mountains produce a color display that is genuinely one of the great natural phenomena of the temperate world, and the reason it surpasses the famous New England fall foliage that gets all the magazine covers comes down to one simple factor: tree species diversity. New England's autumn palette is dominated by sugar maples, producing beautiful but somewhat uniform red and orange. The Appalachian hardwood forest contains an extraordinary range of species: scarlet oaks producing deep burgundy, hickories burning gold, sourwoods going crimson before almost anything else changes, sassafras turning orange and purple simultaneously, sweet gums producing 5-pointed leaves that can show 4 different colors on a single specimen. The result is a color palette of staggering complexity and richness layered across ridge lines stretching for hundreds of miles. The Blue Ridge Parkway during peak color on a clear October morning, with the mist still in the valleys below and every ridge glowing in a different combination of colors, is, without qualification, one of the most naturally beautiful things available to any human being on this continent. And it happens every year, entirely for free, right here in America, in mountains that have been putting on this show for millions of years before anyone was here to see it. Fact 6. The forest that is literally breathing out clouds. The fog that fills Appalachian valleys at dawn is one of the most consistently, heartbreakingly beautiful natural sights in the eastern United States, and most people who witness it do not know that they are watching the forest breathe. Through a process called transpiration, trees release water vapor from their leaves as a byproduct of photosynthesis. A single mature oak can release hundreds of gallons of water into the atmosphere on a warm day. Across hundreds of millions of trees covering millions of acres of Appalachian highlands, this collective transpiration generates enough water vapor to produce a measurable effect on regional precipitation patterns. The forest is literally making its own weather. The valley fog that forms on calm nights when cold air drains downhill and pools in the hollows is fed in significant part by the moisture the forest itself has released. Watching that fog from a ridgetop trail at sunrise, the valleys filled with a slow white river of cloud while the ridgelines glow in early light, is the Appalachian experience that the photographs try and fail to capture. It is perfectly, quietly, peacefully beautiful in a way that resets something inside a person. If you have never seen an Appalachian valley at dawn, you have a reason to plan a trip. Fact 5. The black bear population that came all the way back. By the early 20th century, rampant hunting and the catastrophic deforestation of the logging era had reduced black bear populations across much of the Appalachian region to critically low numbers. In the Great Smoky Mountains in particular, the bear had been hunted and displaced to the point where the population's long-term survival was genuinely uncertain. The establishment of Great Smoky Mountains National Park in 1934 provided the protected habitat the population needed, and the recovery that followed over the subsequent decades is one of the most complete and inspiring wildlife conservation success stories in American history. Today, the Smokies support an estimated 1,500 black bears across the park's 520,000 acres, one of the densest concentrations of black bears in the eastern United States. Encountering one of these animals on a backcountry trail, watching it move through the ancient forest with complete, unhurried indifference to your presence, going about the business of being a bear in the same mountains its ancestors inhabited for millions of years, is one of the most genuinely wild and naturally beautiful wildlife experiences available anywhere in the eastern half of this country. Fact 4. The pace of life that the rest of America is trying to buy back. This one is not about geology or biology. It is about something harder to quantify and arguably more important. Appalachia moves at a different pace than the rest of America. Not because it is behind, not because it lacks ambition, but because the communities that have lived in these mountains for generations developed a relationship with time and place and community that the modern world is now spending billions of dollars on wellness products, meditation apps, and rural retreats trying to approximate. Front porches are still used in the Appalachian Mountains, not as decorative features, but as functional social spaces where evenings are spent watching the light change on the ridge and being present in a way that the productivity culture of modern America actively works against. Neighbors still bring food when someone is sick. Music is still made in living rooms. The mountains are still genuinely daily quiet in the way that cities spend enormous resources trying to simulate. The unhurried, grounded, community-rooted quality of life in the Appalachian Highlands is not a remnant of a slower era. It is a sophisticated and hard-won relationship with what actually matters, one that the rest of the country is slowly and imperfectly trying to rediscover. Appalachia never lost it. Fact 3. The night sky that most Americans have forgotten exists. One of the most underreported environmental losses of the modern era is the disappearance of the night sky from most Americans' daily experience. Light pollution now prevents more than 80% of Americans from seeing the Milky Way with the naked eye from where they live. The Appalachian Mountains, particularly the high ridges and remote hollows of West Virginia, western North Carolina, and the Pennsylvania Highlands, contain some of the darkest skies remaining in the eastern United States. Cherry Springs State Park in Pennsylvania is officially designated as a Gold-tier International Dark Sky Park, one of only a handful in the eastern half of the country, where on a clear, moonless night, the Milky Way is not just visible but overwhelming. Thousands of individual stars, the clear band of the galactic core, satellites tracking silently overhead, shooting stars crossing regularly enough that you stop pointing at them because it would be a full-time occupation. Standing on a dark Appalachian ridge under a fully dark sky on a clear autumn night is a transformative experience in the most literal sense. It physically changes your understanding of where you are and what you are part of. It is one of the most naturally beautiful things available to any human being. And in the Appalachian Mountains, it is still there, waiting for anyone willing to drive away from the lights. Fact 2. The cultural resilience that cannot be manufactured. The history of Appalachia is in many honest ways a history of being extracted from. Coal pulled from the mountains, timber hauled from the hillsides, labor bought cheaply, and workers left behind when the industry moved on, and responding to that history not with bitterness alone but with a cultural tenacity and creativity that is genuinely extraordinary. The music that came from these mountains changed the sound of America. The storytelling traditions preserved literary forms that had vanished from the rest of the English-speaking world. The food culture maintained seed varieties and cooking techniques that the farm-to-table movement would later rediscover and market to urban restaurants at significant markup. The craft traditions, quilting, pottery, woodworking, instrument making, never stopped. They simply continued being practiced in places that the broader culture was not paying attention to. The people of Appalachia have always deserved better economic investment than they have received, including wages that actually reflect the cost and dignity of a human life lived in these mountains. The resilience they have demonstrated in the absence of that investment is remarkable. What they might build with it is a genuinely exciting question. Fact 1. The feeling that Appalachia gives you that nowhere else can. Every place on Earth has a feeling. The feeling of the ocean when you stand at its edge and understand viscerally that it goes further than your mind can actually hold. The feeling of a cathedral when the architecture produces a specific quality of silence and scale. The feeling of a great city at night when the lights and the energy create the sense that everything is possible and happening right now. The Appalachian Mountains have a feeling that is entirely their own and that is almost impossible to fully articulate to someone who has not experienced it. It is something in the combination of the age of the place, the knowledge, even if only intuited, that this ground is 500 million years old, and the scale of the silence, and the specific quality of the light through a mature forest canopy, and the sound of a mountain creek running over ancient rock, and the view from a high ridge at dawn when the world below is still in cloud and you are standing above it in the early light. It is peaceful in a way that feels structural rather than situational. Not the peace of a quiet moment, but the peace of a place that has been here for geological time and will be here long after everything currently causing you anxiety has resolved itself into history. If you have never spent significant time in the Appalachian Mountains, you have an open invitation waiting. The trails are here. The waterfalls are here. The silence is here. The beauty is absolutely, undeniably, completely here. And these mountains have been waiting with extraordinary patience for approximately 500 million years. A few more days until your arrival is nothing to them at all. Which fact made you want to book a trip right now? Drop it in the comments, and if this opened your eyes to a place that deserves far more of the world's attention, share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe before you go, and leave a like if any of this moved you. We will see you in the next one.